Afternoon, Bangalore, Bengaluru. We are so happy to be here today, and it's an absolute privilege and honor for me. My name is Divyata Rajaram, and I'm a crime fiction author based in Dubai, in the UAE. So I think that's the fabulous thing about the festival, is that it's brought all of us together from literally all over the globe. I'm honestly very privileged to have the opportunity to moderate two fantastic literary voices today. One of them, of course, I think is very well known as well to local Bangalorean audiences, Sundar Sarukkai, welcome. And of course, the fantastic Julie Janson. If I can just start with a very brief introduction of Julie and Sundar. Julie represents, a very powerful voice and a representation of indigenous rights, as we've just been saying, coming from Australia, and her as a poet initially, of course, and she still writes poetry. Her writing itself is extremely lyrical even today, and her book and her books, Benevolence, of course, as well as now Maduka, the River Serpent, are literally taking the literary world by storm. Julie brings some extremely important perspectives and knowledge to us in our geography, and we are so honored to have you with us, Julie. Thank you for being with us. Of course, Sundar Sarukkai, I think the less said the better, because the name also says it all. Sundar is a philosopher. It's so topical that our session is titled The Currents of Being. Sundar is, of course, a very well respected educator and an amazing writer of fiction. So Water Days, his latest work, took me right into the heart of Matikere Extension, and so many wonderful stories and narratives of people and the community. And what I loved the most was also how Bangalore has evolved, something that is so important for those of us who come back to the city after a period of time. So Sundar, welcome to our panel.
Thank you.
If I may, I'm going to start with one of the very basic things, but I think there's some things that the internet and AI does not tell us about authors, and it is what they can tell you themselves. And I'd like to just focus, at first, if I may start with Julie, on Julie, some early influences. I think we've all been very inspired by your writing, but I'd like to know, when was that actual moment for you, possibly in your early life, when you discovered you had a writer in you?
Okay. Thank you for that introduction. What I will do is that in Australia, it is acceptable in mainstream Australia and in Indigenous Australia to do what is called an acknowledgement of country, or a welcome to country. So I'm just going to read the acknowledgement of the country that I'm writing about in my novel Maduka, the River Serpent. I'll just read to you this acknowledgement. I pay my respects and acknowledge the presence, places and people of the Northwest New South Wales Indigenous lands and communities, particularly those of the Gamilaroi and Yempa nations. I acknowledge elders past, present and emerging, and recognise that they have always been and always will be caring for country. So that's a formality we do all over Australia, including in the Parliament, at the opening of Parliament. But to answer your question, when did I first realise I was a writer? Mostly when I was about 7 years of age, and I wrote my first poem, some of which I still know, but I'm not going to punish you by actually repeating them. It was more when I became quite politically active when I was at university. I was one of the first children in my family to go to university, and as a young woman with an Aboriginal father, an Indigenous father, it was very unusual to have access to university. And I became very politicised with feminism and political action against the Vietnam War. I was very young, and I'm very old now, so those who haven't heard about the Vietnam War, you can just look that up. And I took part in a lot of protests, and we made loads of costumes and masks and great big American eagles to carry through the streets, and I would write the scenarios. So that was the beginning of my theatrical writing career, which morphed into a novelist career later in my life. Long answer.
Thank you. No, that's absolutely fine. Thank you, Julie. Sundar, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. A very quick answer to that is, I think like a lot of people who are sitting here today, so many of them write. But for me, a writer is actually made by a publisher. In the sense, once you get published, you begin to think you're a writer. But we write so much. And for me, reaching that stage of writer was actually that which is sanctioned by completely outside mechanisms. And why I'm saying that is, because we are published and some of us are there and we come and talk about it in these forums. But since I engage with very different communities and students, I see so many of them sending their written pieces maybe twice or thrice a week. And so, I share this larger world. When I want to call myself a writer, I'm thinking of them. But when we talk about writers of this particular kind, especially LitFest of this kind, I think publishing really has come to define what writing really means.
That's an extremely interesting perspective, Sundar, and I do agree. I think we're all writers, aren't we? And we all have that in terms of creative expression. And when a few of us do have that privilege of being on the platform like this, I love it when somebody says, we'd like to have more people really submitting those written works. We're all here for the love of the written word. So thank you for that. So again, I go back to this session's title, which is The Currents of Being. I have to admit that I was absolutely, I said, how do I bring these two worlds of Sundar Sarukkai and Julie Janson together? Didn't seem like there was anything in common to start off with, until I began to read up, of course, their work and about them. And I think one thing that I found, which has been addressed in both, and is extremely essential, of course, to both of you, is the theme of water in their writings. Water and what it symbolizes, water, in terms of course, not even, as Julie says, not so much even as a metaphor in their writing, but water as symbolic of life itself. And Julie, I'd just like you to tell us a little bit about your writings develop water as a central motive. What specific meanings, scarcity, sociality, life, language, what did you intend for it to carry?
Well, just speaking to Sundar earlier, we realised that we both identify rivers and creeks and water sources as not only a source of life, but a spiritual connection to land. And if we don't have water, and in the next 50 years, if there's not enough water for the planet, then it's going to be horrific. So the essential notion of rivers that feed a country is what draws me often to write about rivers. And some years ago, in 2020, I went out with my husband driving out into the desert of New South Wales, and the great mighty Darling River, which is a huge river by Aboriginal people called the Barka, which goes from Queensland all the way down to South Australia. That river had dried up all along the main watercourse because of cotton farming. Now, why on earth Australian people would want to grow cotton when India grows the best cotton in the world, I have no idea. But the notion of standing in that river and seeing it dead, there's so much of the river with all the dead kangaroos around it and 100-year-old Murray cod fish dying on the banks, absolutely shook me to my core that us human beings could deplete that river to the sake where it caused enormous ecological disaster. And I got really angry because I knew that river was a huge spirit home for a creature called Maduka, the river serpent who lived in that river. And I asked Sundar earlier, does the river spirit still exist if the river doesn't exist? So it was a philosophical discussion before we even got here on the stage. But that is what encouraged me to write a novel. And I thought, I'm not a scientist. If I write an ecological novel, Julie Janson, no one's going to read it. I thought, I'll move on to crime novels. And we all admitted our little secret, we love crime novels. So I looked up on the internet, how to write a crime novel, and it said, start with a body. So I began to write Maduka, the river serpent. But it's actually a novel about ecological disaster and that loss of the spirit for Aboriginal people in the land when a river is taken.
So the question of water days, as a title of my book, refers to a phenomenon which I think many people in Bangalore would know very well, which is a very simple recognition of the fact that the most important day of a week was with the days in which water came. And our week was actually organized by that. So even when I grew up, when I was working at NIAS and I was staying in Matikere, we would, every day of our week was really defined by when the water comes, where it comes, and if it comes at all. And it used to come maybe at 4 o'clock in the morning, 5. So people would stand with our buckets, and you're lucky if it came on the day it said it would come, or you would get some water and you would go back. And then you would store water. Now, this is not a new phenomenon to Bangalore. It was part of North Bangalore. I grew up as a child in Malleshwaram, and we were picking up water every day from the well down and taking it up, because we had a large family. You would, in Matikere, as I said, we were picking water from the streets. And what is very interesting is, although water seems to come on our taps every day, there have been, in many areas of Bangalore today, people still pick up water from taps on the streets. In fact, very funnily, Bangalore has got a very interesting connection to the river, Kaveri, right? So there's a very interesting connection of various ways between Kaveri and Bangalore, because Kaveri water is the one which is sent to Bangalore. Now, Kaveri water comes through South Bangalore before it comes to North Bangalore. So the pressure in South Bangalore is more. So the funny thing is, South Bangaloreans seem to get more water for wasting, whereas North Bangalore, you have to wait to see if you can collect water. So there's this kind of a hierarchy of water distribution in Bangalore. But then, just to point to how important water captures the spirit of the city, is that I'm sure many of you know a Vega City Mall in Bannerghatta Road. That is in South Bangalore. Nobody has a problem in getting water in taps in that area. But you come right next to Vega City, there's a huge migrant settlement. Right below Vega City, right next to it. And I was walking the other day thinking, where is the water problem in Bangalore? There's a tap outside, all painted, wonderfully beautiful pots, red, blue, green, etc. are in a line, and people are waiting to fill water. So water has come to define our everyday life in a very deep manner. So it is, as you said, more than materiality. It is about the real sense of what it means to survive as a family in Bangalore.
Amazing. Moving on quickly to our next question. Julie, in both of your books, like you said, of course, and as in Sundar and yourself, both your books, the setting I found was, you can't imagine the writing in a different setting. Your settings are the geographic location is extremely evocative. It's an essential part of your story. And I want to understand, I get asked this all the time as well, of how much of, when you develop a location or a setting for your novels, how much, does the setting itself play a role as one of the chief protagonists or as a chief character in your writing?
Definitely. The landscape out in the west of New South Wales is very desert-like. The earth is red in a lot of places and grey in others. And it has waterholes and it has mountains. But every single mountain, every small mountain, every single hill, every single rock, every single tree has a place in the cosmos for Indigenous people, for the Nyempa people or the Gamilaroi people. Every single part of features of the landscape appears in a Dreamtime story and a painting and a song and a ceremonial dance that reflects that story. The whole of Australia is like a great cobweb of stories. It's like the Mahabharata. It describes and explains the continent, and Aboriginal people today still maintain that commitment to those sites. So some of the sites are extremely sacred, and a lot of them have been destroyed by mining. So it causes a lot of conflict, both spiritually and materially, for Indigenous people when that happens by international mining corporations.
Yeah, just to extend that, I think if you look at the case of Bangalore, how often do we keep hearing people, especially people who have lived here earlier days, how often they say Bangalore has been destroyed. It's almost every day you travel back from one part to the other and see the kind of traffic or what has happened and broken roads, and everything that can be dysfunctional in a city is embodied in Bangalore. I'm sorry to say that. It's a city I love. I see this as a city I belong to, and it is a city which step by step has been disintegrating in various ways. And especially for those who did not have the capacity to access, more capital, more, where the money to access those facilities, the Bangalore is not a very comfortable place to see. In other words, the destruction is not just about the cities, about the greenery, which Bangalore was very well known for. It is just about the very simple facet of living a life which all of us knew living in Bangalore. Now, when I went to school here, we would go in cycle. And you can't imagine driving in cycle on those roads today. And I think that's part of progress. That's a different question altogether. But what is this idea of destruction? So where does ecology now, how do you extend the definition of ecology from trees and plants and flora and fauna to even these kinds of buildings? How all of this becomes a kind of an ecological crisis that we have to encounter. And that is something as writers we reflect upon in different ways.
Of course, I think again, fantastic perspective. Why should we not view brick and mortar as it stands as a part of our history? Our first lit fest in the Bangalore, what used to be the erstwhile Bangalore Central Jail, what could be a more, and this is all part of, this is all part of that natural, that heritage, that, what is fading away so fast. I think that's a great perspective. If I can just now, I think we're at a good juncture, Julie, to just read into, a lot of our audiences have written into us wanting to hear some of these, at least a little evocative phrase or, a little bit of the reading from our authors. So I think it's a good sort of a midway point. If I may ask you to just give us a little glimpse. Julie, I know your works are not as widely available in India, so I think our readers would love to, have a little bit of a taste of.
Thank you. Okay, I will. I love reading, so I will. I'll read the beginning. I invented a character, and it's interesting, Sundar and I agreed that we'd have these kind of characters who come from kind of humble beginnings, who become private detectives, in my case a private detective anyway, and in order to solve crimes in the town that she lives in. And so I'll introduce her by reading to you all about Auntie June. Right. A crow picking at eye sockets in a sheep's skull was a reminder of Julie to put on her glasses, a reminder of how outback country towns were shrivelling up. A desert landscape shone red and grey against the Darling River. The dusty desolation of Nyempa country, benevolent colonialism. A town beside a stinking green river of dead fish. The ash-filled streets smelt of bushfire, the air heady with barbecued animals. A town where most of the shops had iron mesh grills, chains and big locks. Auntie June had completed her college TAFE course in investigative services. She proudly showed the certificate 3 in a nice frame on the wall. It had taken 30 hours online. Her office was in the main street. It used to be Vince's Video Rentals, and people still dropped overdue items down the hatch. The latest had been Midnight Cowboy. She cleaned the window with a cloth and swept the footpath out front. The handwritten sign stuck on the window announced, Yanakiri Investigation Services, confidentiality guaranteed. That name meant to run fast, as most people she chased were doing that. There were no clients except occasional Aboriginal women wanting June to track cheating husbands or men who'd run off to escape child support payments. The women didn't pay much, nothing in fact, except the occasional kangaroo leg still covered in grey fur. To illustrate her thoughts, when June opened the fridge to get some milk, blood dripped onto the lino. She locked the office door and stepped outside to take in some hot air. Many other businesses stood empty along the road, most of them with for sale signs. The failing economy had gutted the biggest hotel. It sat there now with blackened walls, graffiti and glassless windows. Next door to June's office sat the original Commonwealth Bank, majestic sandstone building, displaying a fly-blown notice on the door. This bank has been closed to improve customer service. Where is she? Shouldn't have looked up. The local policeman, Gunji, Police Sergeant Bruce Blackett, pulled up outside June's office in his wagon and sneered. He was in his 60s with a paunch and thinning grey hair over skin cancers. His black R.M. Williams riding boots were non-uniform issue, convenient for kicking someone. Blackett admired himself in the rearview mirror and picked his teeth with a match. June stuck out her chin and oozed annoyance while the copper looked over her broad golden face, pink lips, tall frame and skinny legs. She knew she was a healthy-looking 50-year-old beauty with white teeth, a freshwater Gamma-Ray Aboriginal woman born of the clay plains, dust and kangaroos. Blackett pointed at the office sign and hooted. He hung his arm out the window and slapped the driver's door. He sounded very amused. Investigated any major crimes lately? Like a murder or a diamond heist? Or just some Aboriginal kid pinching a packet of Arnott's custard cream biscuits, said Blackett. Certificate 3 in investigative services. Jesus wept.
Thank you, Jude.
Okay, I'll just read a short section. I'm not, I don't normally read this, so I thought, well, since Julie was also going to be doing it, I thought I should do this. And actually, we were talking, Julie and me, three of us were talking about this question of crime. Why do we write crime fiction? Why do we write crime novels? I see this as a book about many things. It's about language, it's about migrants, it's about outsiders, insiders, who belongs to Bangalore and who doesn't. And it's a kind of I was responding to the kind of questions which have been repeatedly thrown at all of us. But I also come from a kind of an academic training or work which looks at the world through its socialities, especially the Indian context, families. Everything is so socially mediated and so deeply immersed in it. And so a good crime novel has to have a body, and you spoke, Julie said, we begin with the body. But I didn't begin with the body, but there's a girl who dies. Not murdered, unfortunately, but it's still a crime. Not a crime, I don't know what it is. Anyway, there's a dead body. That much is there. Okay, but then everything in India is social. Even death is a social phenomenon. You can't die in peace, you can't die alone. And it is that section which I want to read. And about how this is about it's a street, it's a small world which is so closely tied together. Everything is about gossip, everybody talking to each other while they collect water and the tap and so on. So this is when they know about the girl who has died. We don't know how, and they have cremated her and the family has come back. So it says, that night as Purnima was cleaning the kitchen platform, Mrs. Butt came to the window. Her round face, a caricature of the full moon, suddenly rose into Purnima's view. Oi, Mrs. Butt whispered, are you cooking so late? No, cleaning. Did you hear about that girl? Archana was that girl today. And so Butt is explaining to her what happened. It seems that when they went to the guard, now they also have the electric crematorium, there was a power cut. There were 5 bodies waiting in line. Imagine a queue for dead bodies. It was not pleasant, not at all. Each of the bodies had come from different parts of the city. The power had been cut in the morning and was expected back any time. So every time a new entourage came to the guard, they were told to wait. Most of the bodies came in corporation vans except 2 that were carried on bamboo stretchers. Soon there was a big crowd at the guard and around the crematorium building. Other than the immediate family, those who stayed near the respective bodies, the crowd dispersed into the many corners of the guard as they waited for their turn of their body to be cremated. There was one wood fire smoldering in a corner. Burning bodies with wood was fast becoming extinct, an endangered mode of bidding goodbye to the mortal body. Wood was so expensive these days, and the process of burning was not necessarily a happy one. Tired of waiting, many in the crowd drifted outside the guard. A horde of hand carts selling anything from cut cucumbers to roasted peanuts suddenly materialized near the entrance. Some from the drifting crowd went towards these carts, while others went to the small hotels nearby, if not to snack, at least to have some coffee, while the family members continued arguing with the crematorium officials. Some of them sat at the feet of the bodies amidst the sickening smell of fading flowers, ranting against the electricity board and the attendants. A crisis that could have been managed in silence blew up into a fight when one family paid an attendant some money to break the queue. A testimony to the impatience of the living with those who were dead. Everybody wanted to go back, to quickly get it over with, this conversion of flesh into ash. Finally, when the power came on, there was a spontaneous shout and incomprehensibly applause. The hotels emptied rapidly. The handcart vendors stayed for a while, partly out of curiosity, but also filled with the lethargy of the living. And that is how her final journey was, concluded Mrs. Butt. A death too early in life and a cremation too late in the queue. The family is back only now and you can imagine how they feel. Purnima continued scrubbing, pouring water from a large vessel onto the kitchen platform on the floor. The floor shone like a lake upon which her footprints were little inhabited islands. Mrs. Butt's moon face suddenly dipped and was gone. Purnima lifted her head, saw her shadow drown in a muddy puddle under a street light that was getting ready for bed. Thank you.
What can I say? I'm the biggest fan. I love that phrase, the lethargy of living. So well put. I think that's another segue for me to move on to my next question, which is both of you, Julie and Sundar, have addressed repeatedly the themes of belonging. When we say we belong to a space, so we belong to a location, and somebody else is an outsider. And we, of course, as it was in your case, the First Nation, the indigenous peoples rather, and of course in your case, the original residents of Bangalore and those who've come in. So I just wanted to ask you both very quickly in turn, what in your opinion qualifies belonging and what defines or characterizes somebody as an outsider?
Well, I can't talk on behalf of all Indigenous people in Australia, but I can talk on behalf of my own family and my own family history and the families that I've had the privilege to live amongst out in desert communities. And for my father's country was regarded as the Hawkesbury River country. So it was all the stony sandstone and the eucalyptus trees along this great mighty river called the Hawkesbury River. Its real name is Rajaram River, is the Aboriginal name. And he would take us fishing up that river. We didn't live on that river, we lived on another adjacent smaller river and grew up getting oysters, catching fish and gathering crabs in crab pots. And we were living right in the middle of Sydney. So it's kind of a miracle we weren't poisoned by the river. That's all I can think of. But that sense of belonging to that country for my father was very important. And to me is that we would go and we would camp up in a cave. And sometimes my modern friends go, Julie, you're making this up. I said, no, I'm not making it up. As children, he would take us up and we'd camp in a cave up on the Hawkesbury River, and we would make beds out of ferns, and he would put army greatcoats on top of them for us to sleep on. And we'd wake up in the morning and we'd go fishing with him. But the sense of having to go back to that sandstone country was so powerful in him, because if you travelled right up that river by canoe for 3 or 4 days, you would come to the place of the original family came from, and that was regarded as kind of the spiritual home. But when I lived along the river, the Darling River, which subsequently dried up, there was a great sense too of people belonging to a certain country. And Indigenous clans like the Nyempa people or the Gomeroi people would have distinctive moments when their land would end and another person's land would begin. So this has been very important in the terms of land rights for Australian Indigenous people. And we had a government law called Mabo that was forced through Parliament about 10 years ago, which rescinded the notion that Australia was terra nullius. Terra nullius means empty land, which is what the first British who invaded Australia in 1788 declared the land to be terra nullius. Therefore, the British could come and take it willy-nilly. So for Aboriginal people, the law changing so that terra nullius was no longer valued was incredibly important in Australia, and Indigenous people then could do land claims on certain aspects of land. And a lot of land has been handed back to Indigenous people. None of the land in the precious farming districts, most of it's desert land or rough land that nobody else wants, but nevertheless, that is what belonging to land means for Indigenous people.
Yeah, and I think the question of land is very important in every sense of the word of belonging, right? But the question of who is a Bangalorean, I think resonates very, very strongly in very many different ways. I hear it every time I'm in the auto or cabs. When I talk to the cab drivers, it's all about who is a Bangalorean. Who are these outsiders who come in? And very often when they talk about these outsiders, it's often in terms of language. And this is, it's a very sad thing that when the Indian state gets, the nation gets reorganized into states, they do it on the basis of linguistic states, in terms of language. So which means to suggest that language is going to give our identity. But Bangalore is such a mix of languages which no other city in India has. And therefore it is inhabited by people of very, very different languages. People who have been here for very, very long time from different languages, with the earlier Tamil and Telugu, of course. But then there have been other speakers like Konkani, Kodagawa, various other languages, Tulu and so on in Karnataka itself. And North Karnataka sounds so different from what you hear in Bangalore and so on. So the question of language affirming an identity is a problem. Then how else would we think of what is it to be a Bangalorean? I don't know, this is a thing which I struggle with, because when my earlier novel had come out, Following a Prayer, I was talking to Vivek Menezes, who runs a Goa Lit Fest, and he did a book discussion with me in Goa. And the first thing when he met me, he asked, where is a Bangalore novel? There is a Delhi novel, there is a Bombay novel. Why isn't there a Bangalore novel? So I didn't want to tell him whether there is or not, but I wanted to tell him that, look, I want to write a novel where I want to assert my belongingness to this place. This is my city, and I want to stake a claim to it. Not based on, I don't know, based on what? Based on language, how many years I have lived here, what I have contributed to this place. I think those become very diffuse. But I can give one answer of how belongingness, what it means to me. That when I travel anywhere and I come back to Bangalore, I know I have reached home. Maybe it's about, I may speak in Kannada to the driver as I'm coming along, or if somebody else is speaking English, or in Hindi I may have to negotiate with somebody in Hindi. But it is that feeling of having come, of having arrived, of being in a space which seems to be yours. Now, how do we articulate it for such a diverse, wide group of people who are here now? How do we all think of what is it to be a Malayali in Bangalore? What is it to be a Hindi speaker? What is it to be a Tamil? What is it to be a Kannada speaker in Bangalore? I'll just end with this point. The other day, I met a person whom I had not met for many years, and the first thing she tells me, she says, now Kannadigas are becoming minority in Bangalore. It's out of the context. I've not met her for years. I just get off the thing, I see her on the road and she says, Kannada people have become minority. They always were, in a sense, minority in Bangalore. And it is that, but there is something unique to what each of us have feel as being part of Bangalore. I think that's the part of the struggle I try and make sense of in this book. Because Bangalore is changing so much without any of us asserting our identity and our ownership over it. And whatever happens in the story is really the story of what happens to the state silently.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Julie. Thank you so much, Sundar. I think I wouldn't be doing justice to this panel if I didn't, of course, as we always say, we writers are incomplete without the readers. And it's only complete, and our books are only complete when you, our readers, are basically telling us exactly what you think. So I'd love to, we have two amazing, as you can see, literary personalities here on stage, and I'd love to open it up now to some audience questions. If anybody would like to put a hand up and have a question, I think I see if you would, can you get a mic there please? The gentleman at the back. I'll come to you, sir. If I could just have just a quick intro, and then please address which one of the...
Hello, my name is Gopal. I'm a friend of Sundar. So I just wanted to remark that Bangalore was great and is still great. You just have to adapt. You can't resist change. I still cycle around. The trees are beautiful. I came here by cycle. And water is not a problem. Bangalore is a great place.
I'd love to be.
I love that.
I wish all Bangaloreans had that access to water.
Cycling, you can cycle. Yeah.
That's true.
It's very safe. If you avoid the main arteries, you'll find parallel roads. The roads are beautiful.
Glass half full.
Yeah.
I like that. That's
you can
the
smile
spirit.
at everybody. It's good. It's a lot of fun cycling. You should try.
Thank you, sir. That's certainly put a very nice optimistic spin on the session, exactly as we wanted. The gentleman here right up front, please.
This question is to Julie. How are the young readers have taken your novel?
So what was that?
How are the
How have the young readers,
Young
am I getting
readers,
that right?
yeah,
The young readers have taken your novel.
Well, you know, I don't know if you've noticed, but young readers are very thin on the ground. My grandchildren, I say, did you enjoy the novel? And they go, what novel? You know, look, I think I've met here in India, I've been here nearly 2 weeks now. I feel like I live here in Bangalore now that I'm here. I find young writers and young readers are very excited by crime novels. They also love the historical novels. And there are a lot of readers out there, but it's often I have an audience and most of it is made up of old ladies. And so I love them because they are kind of my audience in many ways. And you write to the people that love your work. But I hope with the crime novels I write, because they are often very much embedded in ecological disaster and how do we mitigate that, how do we change that, how do we challenge it, how do we protest, then younger readers tend to read the crime novels. And because they're a bit kind of racy sometimes.
I hope that answered your question. Is anybody from the... Yes, thank you. This hall goes all the way, so the gentleman, yes, at the back.
This is a question for Sundar, and I'm trying to come to the point where local people are not the majority, they're always not there, they're absent, this, that. But I think that's the great thing about Bangalore, which the local person is not in your face at any time, and that's the reason a lot of people have come here. And I don't know what you think about it.
No, I totally agree with it. I think it's that's part of the reasons why people who come from other places feel safest and homely in Bangalore. They can come from Northeast, they can come from Gujarat, Rajasthan, anywhere, and they feel a very different sense of. Now the question is, in any social formation of any social communities, that will lead to certain kinds of questions. What kind of jobs they come for, what benefits they seem to get, what areas where water comes when you open a tap, who belongs, who lives in those areas, where do the people, a large number of so-called older Bangalorean communities, right, where do they live and what facilities do they have? It is this kind of social strife which happens within the development of something like Bangalore, but without doubt, and I can say this, although it may sound like a stereotype, I think Bangalore is the most gentlest of people. I can believe to defend that. It's the most gentlest of people as a community for outsiders or within, the local various kinds of activities within the city.
Amazing. Sir, I am so sorry, but we have time for just maybe one more question. I saw a young lady at the back, yes, I think who's dying to say something, and we love to hear different perspectives of different, so please.
So my name is Shubhangi, and maybe this question is just coming from me being a literature student and a linguistics student as such. I wanted to know both of your opinions on, both of you talked about death quite a bit, so maybe your opinions on language death and the death of knowledge systems which come from language death, in case of Aboriginal peoples, the death of their languages, and as such the death of their knowledge systems. And also nowadays we've been hearing a lot about how in Bangalore Kannada is dying, and how maybe with that the death of the Kannada knowledge system will also come. So a little bit of your guys' opinion on that.
My darling, we have exactly 1 minute left, so I'm going to allow them to answer that with brevity. But a fantastic question.
Well, death of language is a really important thing, and I find in Australia now that there's a huge resurgence coming from Indigenous people themselves to research their own language and bring them back, and to bring back ceremonies. So it's not being a gift from any English descended people, but it's Aboriginal people themselves fighting for their languages. And every time I write a novel, I make sure that I use the language from the area, but that it's understandable for the people who are reading in English. We have to make it so people can comprehend.
Very quickly, it's a very important question. Kannada is not dying at all. Kannada is doing very, very, very well. People don't speak enough of Kannada in Bangalore, but Bangalore has actually got an insignificant part of the Kannada literary community around the state. But more important, I think as writers, one of the things, I think Julie also does that in a book, is our struggle is engaging with language. If there is anything about death of language, the only thing I would say is, I have tried very hard in writing a book in English which sounds like Kannada. So to me, it is the death of British school-taught English that really runs behind the whole aim of writing for me.
I think I couldn't have asked for a better way to conclude this session. I'm sure the audience agrees with you. We're all very, very proud literary lovers. We're proud Bangaloreans and from whichever part of the country, and of course very, very proud Indians. But most of all, I think we are so proud that we are able to showcase and have this event and invite, as I said, two fantastic literary personalities. Julie, Janson, thank you so much for giving us a peep into your world and doing the important work that you do for the indigenous peoples, representing their voice. And of course, Sundar, I think you've just, encapsulated everything so beautifully for us, the essence of what it means to live in this beautiful city, and also, of course, the essence of life itself. And so we conclude our session, The Currents of Being. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much for coming. Appreciate it.